In 1987, 4 Catholic nuns disappeared from a remote monastery in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon, leaving behind only their evening prayers and an unlocked chapel door. For 37 years, their fate remained one of the Pacific Northwest's most haunting mysteries. But when a documentary filmmaker arrives to investigate their disappearance, she uncovers evidence that the sisters never left the monastery grounds at all, and that someone has been keeping a terrible secret buried beneath consecrated ground. If you're fascinated by unsolved mysteries and the darkness that hides in plain sight, subscribe and join us as we uncover the truth. The last known photograph of the 4 nuns was taken on October 12, 1987, during evening vespers at Our Lady of Sorrows Monastery. Sister Catherine Brennan, age 71, sits at the organ, her weathered hands poised above the keys. Sister Ruth Alvarez, 68, stands beside her with a hymnal open. Sister Margaret Chen, 34, and Sister Isabel Morrison, 29, kneel in prayer at the front pew, their faces serene in the candlelight. The photograph was discovered in the camera of a visiting pilgrim who had stopped at the monastery that afternoon. She had asked permission to photograph the evening service, and the nuns had graciously agreed, never knowing this image would become their last testament to the living world. By morning, all 4 women had vanished. The initial investigation found no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of forced entry or departure. Their personal belongings remained in their cells, habits hanging in wardrobes, prayer books on nightstands, eyeglasses folded beside reading lamps. The monastery's ancient bell, which Sister Catherine rang faithfully each morning at dawn, remained silent. Theories proliferated over the decades. Some claimed the nuns had been called by God into the wilderness, ascending to heaven like Elijah in his chariot of fire. Others whispered darker possibilities: foul play, abduction, a mass suicide pact. The Catholic diocese eventually declared the monastery too isolated to maintain and sold the property in 1991. But the mystery never died. In the autumn of 2024, documentary filmmaker Rachel Moreno received an anonymous email containing a single sentence. "The sisters are still at Our Lady of Sorrows. They never left." What followed would transform a cold case into a living nightmare and reveal that some secrets, once buried, demand to be found. Rachel Moreno's hands gripped the steering wheel as her rental car climbed the narrow mountain road toward what remained of Our Lady of Sorrows Monastery. Douglas firs crowded the asphalt on both sides, their branches creating a tunnel of shadow despite the October afternoon sun. Her documentary crew, cameraman Jules Peterson and sound technician Maya Okonkwo, followed in a second vehicle, equipment cases rattling in the back. The anonymous email had arrived 3 weeks ago, forwarded through her production company's website. Contact form. Rachel had almost deleted it, dismissing it as the kind of conspiracy theory that cluttered her inbox daily. But something about its brevity had nagged at her. No rambling manifesto, no demands for money or credit, just that single declarative sentence. She had spent 2 weeks researching the case, diving into newspaper archives and police reports from 1987. The disappearance of 4 nuns from an isolated monastery should have dominated headlines, but the story had been quickly overshadowed by the stock market crash of Black Monday and the Iran-Contra hearings. By 1988, the mystery had faded from public consciousness, relegated to the realm of unsolved cases that occasionally surfaced in true crime forums. The road curved sharply, and Rachel caught her first glimpse of the monastery through a gap in the trees. The stone structure perched on a rocky outcrop like a medieval fortress, its bell tower silhouetted against gray clouds gathering to the west. The building appeared larger than she had expected. 3 stories of weathered granite with narrow windows and a slate roof darkened by moss. Rachel pulled into an overgrown parking area where fragments of asphalt broke through tall grass. Jules and Maya parked beside her, and all three stepped out into the mountain air, crisp with the scent of pine and approaching rain. "This place gives me the creeps already," Maya said, slinging her sound equipment bag over her shoulder. She was a compact woman in her 30s with close-cropped hair and an expression that suggested she didn't scare easily, but her eyes swept the monastery's facade with unmistakable wariness. Jules, tall and lanky with perpetually tousled hair, was already pulling out his camera rig. "Perfect atmosphere, though. The light's going to be incredible when those clouds roll in." He had the enthusiasm of someone who viewed the world through a lens, always calculating angles and compositions. Rachel studied the building, noting the boarded windows on the ground floor and the iron chain securing the main entrance. According to her research, the monastery had changed hands twice since the diocese sold it. The current owner, a real estate developer named Thomas Vance, had purchased it in 2019 with plans to convert it into a boutique hotel. Those plans had apparently stalled, leaving the structure in a state of abandonment. "Vance gave us permission to film here, right?" Maya asked, noticing Rachel's scrutiny of the locked entrance. "His assistant sent the release forms last week," Rachel confirmed. "He's supposed to meet us here with keys." She checked her phone. No signal. The mountain's isolation was total. They waited 15 minutes before headlights appeared on the access road. A black SUV emerged from the tree line and parked beside their vehicles. A man in his 50s stepped out, dressed in expensive outdoor gear that looked freshly purchased. His silver hair was carefully styled, and his handshake was firm but perfunctory. "Ms. Moreno, I presume?" Thomas Vance said. "Apologies for the delay. Cell service is non-existent up here, as you've probably discovered." "We appreciate you allowing us access," Rachel replied. "Your assistant mentioned you'd purchased the property for development." Vance's expression tightened slightly. "That was the plan. Unfortunately, the building has some structural issues that make renovation cost prohibitive. I'm currently in negotiations to sell to a preservation society." He pulled a heavy keyring from his pocket and approached the main entrance. As he worked to unlock the chain, Rachel asked, "Have you spent much time exploring the interior?" "Initial walkthroughs with contractors and engineers," Vance said, not looking at her. "Enough to know the project wasn't viable." The chain came free with a metallic clatter that echoed against the stone walls. "I should warn you, the electricity is shut off, and some areas are unsafe. Stay on the main floors and avoid the tower entirely. The stairs are unstable." He pushed open the heavy wooden door, revealing darkness beyond. The smell that emerged was musty and cold, tinged with something organic that Rachel couldn't quite identify. Mold, perhaps, or dry rot in the ancient timbers. "How long can we stay?" Jules asked, already adjusting his camera settings for low light. "Until sunset," Vance replied. "I can't risk liability with people here after dark. The property isn't insured for visitors." He checked his watch. "That gives you about 3 hours. I'll wait in my vehicle." The monastery's interior swallowed them in shadow. Jules activated his camera light, the LED beam cutting through dust motes that swirled in the disturbed air. The entrance hall was surprisingly intact. Stone floors still solid underfoot, wooden pews lining the walls, a statue of the Virgin Mary gazing down from an alcove with paint-chipped serenity. Rachel pulled out her tablet, displaying the floor plan she'd found in the diocesan archives. "The chapel should be straight ahead. The sisters' cells were on the second floor, north wing. That's where we should start." They moved deeper into the building, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The chapel was a long, rectangular space with vaulted ceilings and rows of wooden pews facing an altar of white marble. Stained glass windows, though filmed with grime, still held their colors. blues and reds and golds depicting scenes from the lives of saints. Maya set up her equipment, while Jules began filming establishing shots. Rachel walked slowly down the center aisle, trying to imagine the space as it had been on that October night in 1987. Sister Catherine at the organ, Sister Ruth with her hymnal, the younger nuns kneeling in prayer. And then, nothing. Silence. Absence. "Where did you go?" Rachel whispered to the empty air. "You talking to ghosts already?" Maya asked, adjusting her boom microphone. But her attempt at humor fell flat in the chapel's oppressive quiet. They spent an hour documenting the ground floor before ascending the main staircase to the second level. The steps groaned under their weight, and Rachel noticed watermarks on the walls where rain had leaked through damaged sections of roof. The nuns' cells lined a long corridor, each door marked with a simple wooden cross. Rachel pushed open the first door, hinges shrieking in protest. The cell was small and austere. A narrow bed with a bare mattress, a writing desk, a wooden chair, a crucifix on the wall. Dust lay thick on every surface, unmarked by footprints. In the corner stood a small wardrobe, its door hanging ajar. "This feels wrong," Maya said from the doorway, "like we're intruding on something." Jules moved past her, filming the sparse interior. The abandonment is what makes it powerful. You can feel their absence. Rachel opened the wardrobe, finding only wire hangers and the ghost of mothballs. But when she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A piece of paper wedged between the bed frame and the wall, yellowed with age but still intact. She crouched and carefully extracted it. The paper was a handwritten letter, the ink faded but legible. Her heart rate quickened as she read the opening lines. "Dearest Margaret, I must confess something that weighs heavily on my conscience. What we discovered in the catacombs beneath the chapel." The letter ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted. "Catacombs?" Rachel read aloud. "The floor plans don't show any catacombs." Maya and Jules crowded around to look at the letter. "Who wrote it?" Maya asked. Rachel examined the signature at the bottom, barely visible. "Sister Isabel Morrison, one of the missing nuns." She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the monastery's temperature. She was writing to Sister Margaret Chen, the other younger nun. "What do you think they discovered?" Jules asked, his camera still recording. Before Rachel could respond, a sound echoed through the corridor, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It lasted only a few seconds before fading to silence, but it was unmistakable. A bell. The three of them stood frozen, staring at each other. "That came from the bell tower," Maya said, her voice tight. "But Vance said it was structurally unsafe." Rachel's mind raced. The monastery had been abandoned for decades. There was no electricity, no mechanism to ring the bell automatically. And yet they had all heard it, clear as any church bell calling the faithful to prayer. Jules lowered his camera slightly. "Maybe Vance is messing with us, testing our reactions for some reason." "Or the wind," Maya suggested, though she sounded unconvinced. "Old buildings make weird noises." Rachel folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her jacket pocket. "Let's check the tower. Even if it's unsafe, we need to see what's up there." They made their way back to the main staircase and found a smaller, narrower flight that spiraled upward into darkness. A chain hung across the entrance with a hand-lettered sign, "Danger, structural damage, no entry." Rachel stepped over the chain without hesitation. Behind her, she heard Maya curse softly and follow. Jules brought up the rear, his camera light illuminating the worn stone steps. The spiral staircase was claustrophobic, the walls pressing close on both sides. Rachel counted 43 steps before they emerged into the bell tower chamber. The space was circular, about 15 feet in diameter, with arched openings on 4 sides, looking out over the forested mountains. In the center hung an enormous bronze bell, green with verdigris, suspended from massive wooden beams. The bell was still moving, swaying almost imperceptibly. The motion was dying but visible. "Someone just rang this," Maya whispered. Rachel approached the bell cautiously, examining the ropes that hung from its crown. They appeared ancient, frayed and discolored, but they were moving too, still settling from recent disturbance. "Vance?" Jules said. "Has to be. He came up here before we arrived." But even as he spoke, Rachel noticed something that made her blood run cold. The floor around the bell was covered in undisturbed dust and bird droppings. There were no footprints, no marks of any kind to suggest anyone had been in this chamber for years. Except for one thing. Pressed into the dust near the western archway was a perfect handprint. Small and delicate. A woman's hand. And it was fresh. Rachel photographed the handprint with her phone before anyone could disturb it. The image was clear. 5 distinct fingers, the palms heel, even the subtle whorls that might contain fingerprints. Fresh enough that the dust hadn't yet settled back into the depression. "This doesn't make sense," Jules said, circling the bell while keeping his distance from the print. "If someone came up here recently, where are their footprints? You can't reach that spot without walking through all this dust." Maya crouched near the archway, examining the handprint from different angles. Unless they came from outside, through one of these openings. Rachel looked out the western arch where the handprint was located. A 40-foot drop to the monastery's slate roof, then another 20 feet to the rocky ground below. No scaffolding, no ladder, no visible means of access. "No one climbed up here. It's impossible." "Then we're back to ghosts," Maya said, her tone suggesting she was only half joking. Rachel's mind worked through possibilities, trying to maintain logic in the face of the inexplicable. The bell had rung. The handprint was real. But supernatural explanations served no purpose in a documentary investigation. There had to be a rational answer, even if they couldn't see it yet. "Let's go back down," she decided. "We need to find those catacombs Sister Isabel mentioned in her letter." They descended the spiral staircase in silence, each of them glancing back occasionally as if expecting the bell to ring again. When they reached the main floor, Rachel noticed Thomas Vance standing in the chapel, hands in his pockets, staring at the altar. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked without turning around. "We heard the bell," Rachel said carefully, watching his reaction. "From the tower." Vance's shoulders tensed slightly. "Wind, probably. That bell hasn't rung in decades." "Have you ever explored the lower levels of the monastery?" Rachel asked. "Anything beneath the chapel?" Now Vance turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "There's a basement. Storage rooms mostly. Nothing interesting for your documentary." "The diocesan records mention catacombs," Rachel pressed. "Burial chambers for the sisters who served here over the years." Vance's jaw tightened. "I'm not familiar with any catacombs. The structural engineers who surveyed the building never mentioned anything like that." He checked his watch with deliberate emphasis. "You have about 90 minutes of daylight left. I'd suggest you focus on the main floors if you want usable footage." He walked past them toward the entrance, his footsteps echoing away into silence. "He's lying," Maya whispered once Vance was out of earshot. "Did you see his face when you mentioned the catacombs?" Rachel nodded slowly. "He knows something. Question is whether he's hiding it deliberately, or whether he's scared of what's down there." Jules adjusted his camera rig. "So we're going to ignore his advice and find the entrance anyway." Obviously, Rachel said. They split up to search more efficiently, agreeing to meet back at the chapel in 30 minutes. Rachel took the northern section of the monastery, opening doors that revealed abandoned cells, a communal dining hall with long tables still in place, and a library whose shelves sagged under the weight of water-damaged books. In what appeared to have been the Mother Superior's office, Rachel found a large wooden desk covered in papers that had merged into a single pulpy mass from repeated cycles of moisture and drying. A filing cabinet in the corner had rusted shut, but when she forced the bottom drawer open, she discovered a leather-bound ledger that had survived relatively intact. The ledger contained records of the monastery's daily operations, deliveries of food and supplies, maintenance schedules, visitor logs. Rachel flipped through pages dated 1987, reading entries in neat handwriting that documented the mundane rhythms of monastic life. September entries, October entries, each day accounted for with meticulous detail. Until October 13th, 1987, the day after the nuns disappeared. The entries stopped. But someone had written a single sentence on October 14th in different handwriting, hasty and uneven. They went below. God forgive us, they went below, and we sealed it. Rachel's hands trembled as she photographed the page. Who sealed what? She murmured. A sound from the hallway made her look up. Footsteps approaching, too heavy to be Maya or Jules. She slipped the ledger under her arm and moved to the doorway, peering out into the corridor. Thomas Vance stood at the far end, his back to her, examining something on the wall. As Rachel watched, he reached up and pressed against a section of wooden paneling. A soft click echoed in the stillness, and a portion of the wall swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. A hidden door. Vance glanced around furtively, then stepped through the opening. The panel began to swing closed behind him, and Rachel made a split-second decision. She ran down the corridor as quietly as possible and caught the panel just before it latched, holding it open a few inches. Through the gap, she could see stone steps descending into blackness, and from somewhere far below, barely audible, came a sound that made her breath catch. Singing. 4 voices in harmony, thin and ethereal, rising from the depths like a hymn from the grave. Rachel's rational mind insisted the singing was a trick of acoustics, wind moving through underground chambers, the building's structure groaning as temperature differentials created pressure changes. But the voices were too distinct, too deliberately harmonic. She recognized the melody. Ave Maria, sung in Latin, each phrase clear despite the distance. She pulled out her phone and texted Jules and Maya. Found entrance to lower levels? North wing? Mother Superior's office? Come now. While waiting for them, Rachel held the hidden panel open and listened. The singing continued for perhaps 2 minutes before fading to silence. She strained to hear anything else. Footsteps, voices, any indication of Vance moving through the space below. Nothing came. Jules and Maya arrived within minutes, both breathing hard from running through the monastery's corridors. You found it, Maya said, staring at the opening. And Vance is down there, Rachel added. He went through about 5 minutes ago. Jules frowned. So he definitely knows about the catacombs and lied to us about it. Why? That's what we're going to find out. Rachel pushed the panel fully open, revealing a narrow staircase carved from stone. The steps were worn smooth in the center from centuries of use, and the walls glistened with moisture. We stay together. We document everything, and we don't take unnecessary risks. Maya pulled a flashlight from her equipment bag and tested it. Define unnecessary. Rachel managed a tight smile. Following a potentially dangerous property owner into an unmapped catacomb system probably qualifies. But we're doing it anyway. They descended single file, Jules in the lead with his camera light, Rachel in the middle, Maya bringing up the rear with her flashlight and a backup recorder. The temperature dropped noticeably with each step, and the air grew thick with the smell of earth and stone and something else. Incense, perhaps, though that seemed impossible in a monastery abandoned for decades. The staircase spiraled downward for what Rachel estimated was 40 feet before opening into a vaulted chamber. Jules swept his light across the space, revealing walls lined with niches carved into the stone. Each niche contained a skeleton, the bones arranged in peaceful repose, skulls facing outward with empty eye sockets that seemed to track their movement. "The catacombs," Maya whispered. "This is where they buried the sisters." Rachel counted at least 30 niches in the visible sections of wall, each marked with a small brass plaque bearing a name and dates. Sister Agatha Devereux, 1823-1891. Sister Rose Kimball, 1856-1923. The plaques continued chronologically, documenting generations of women who had lived and died in service to their faith. But the four most recent niches, in a section that appeared newer than the surrounding stone, bore no plaques at all. And they were not empty. Rachel approached slowly, her heart hammering. 4 bodies lay in the niches, preserved by the cool, dry air of the catacombs. They wore the black habits of the Benedictine order, their hands crossed over their chests, rosaries entwined in skeletal fingers. Jules filmed in silence, his camera capturing every detail. Maya had gone very still, her flashlight beam fixed on the bodies. "Is this them?" Maya asked quietly. "The missing nuns?" Rachel pulled up the photograph from 1987 on her phone and compared it to the bodies. The 2 older women in the niches could easily be Sister Catherine and Sister Ruth, their heights and builds matching the photograph. The 2 younger bodies, though decomposed, showed similar physical characteristics to Sister Margaret and Sister Isabel. "We need to call the police," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the horror of the discovery. "This is a crime scene." "Is it, though?" Jules lowered his camera slightly. "I mean, they're in burial niches in a catacomb. Someone laid them to rest here." "Without reporting their deaths," Rachel countered. "Without any investigation into how 4 healthy women all died on the same night." She pulled out her phone, knowing, even as she did, that there would be no signal this deep underground. A sound echoed through the catacombs, footsteps approaching from a passage they hadn't yet explored. All 3 of them turned toward the darkness, and Thomas Vance emerged into the light, his expression haunted. "I was hoping you wouldn't find this," he said quietly. Rachel positioned herself between Vance and her crew. "You knew they were here. All this time, you knew." Vance held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I didn't kill them, if that's what you're thinking. I found them when I purchased the property. They were already here, already laid to rest like this." "And you didn't report it to the authorities?" Rachel's anger was building now, cutting through her fear. 4 women missing for 37 years, and you just left them here?" "Because I read what happened," Vance said, his voice rising with emotion. "I found the records, the final entries in their journals. What they discovered down here—" He broke off, glancing around the catacomb as if afraid of being overheard. "What did they discover?" Rachel pressed. Vance looked at her with eyes that held genuine fear. "This isn't the only chamber. There are older sections, much older, that date back centuries before the monastery was built. The nuns found something in the deepest level, something that should have stayed buried." Maya made a small sound of distress. Jules continued filming, his camera light unwavering. "Show us," Rachel said. Vance shook his head violently. "Absolutely not. I sealed that section 5 years ago, bricked up the entrance and told myself I'd never come down here again." "But you did come down," Rachel observed. "Just now. Why?" "Because I heard the bell," Vance admitted. "The same bell that hasn't rung in decades. The same bell that rang the night the nuns died." He looked at Rachel with desperate intensity. "Don't you understand? Something woke up when you arrived. Whatever they disturbed 37 years ago, it's active again." From somewhere deep in the catacombs, echoing through passages they couldn't see, came the sound of singing once more. 4 voices in perfect harmony, chanting in Latin, the words ancient and beautiful and terrible. And this time, Rachel recognized what they were singing. The Requiem Mass. The prayers for the dead. The singing stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving only the sound of their breathing in the stone chamber. Rachel's journalist instincts warred with her survival instincts. Every rational part of her screamed to leave immediately, to get back to the surface and call the authorities. But she had spent her career chasing stories others abandoned, and this one felt unfinished. "The journals you mentioned," she said to Vance. "Where are they?" Vance gestured toward a passage leading away from the burial niches. "There's a small chapel deeper in. The nuns used it for private meditation. That's where I found their final entries, along with—" He hesitated. "Along with evidence of what they were doing down here in those last days." Rachel made a decision. "Show us." "This is insane," Maya muttered, but she followed as Vance led them through the narrow passage. Jules kept his camera rolling, documenting every step. The passage opened into a circular chamber about 20 feet in diameter. Unlike the burial catacombs, this space showed signs of regular use despite the decades of abandonment. Candles stood in wall sconces, their wax melted into stalactites of varying lengths. A small stone altar occupied the center of the room, its surface marked with dark stains that Rachel hoped were wine and not something more sinister. Against the far wall stood a wooden cabinet, its doors hanging open to reveal 4 leather journals arranged in a neat row. Vance approached them, carefully, almost reverently, and retrieved one. "Sister Isabel Morrison's journal," he said, handing it to Rachel. "Read the entries from October 11th and 12th, 1987. Rachel opened the journal to the marked dates. The handwriting was the same as the letter she'd found earlier. Neat, precise, almost calligraphic. She read aloud so Jules and Maya could hear. October 11th, 1987. Sister Margaret and I have continued our explorations of the lower catacombs against Mother Superior's wishes. What we discovered today defies explanation. Behind a collapsed section of wall in the eastern passage, we found a chamber that predates the monastery by centuries. The architecture is unlike anything in the historical records. Symbols carved into the walls that are neither Christian nor pagan, at least nothing we recognize. Rachel flipped to the next entry. October 12th, 1987. We told Sister Catherine and Sister Ruth what we found. They insisted we show them immediately. All 4 of us descended tonight after Vespers. The chamber, we should never have opened it. The air inside was different, wrong somehow, and the symbols on the walls seemed to move in the candlelight. Sister Catherine began to feel ill, complained of voices in her head. Sister Ruth started speaking in a language none of us knew. We tried to leave, but the passage had changed. The way we came in was no longer there. The entry ended mid-sentence, the final words trailing off into an ink blot, as if the writer's hand had faltered. "There's more," Vance said quietly, retrieving another journal, Sister Margaret Chen's. He opened it to a page marked with a strip of fabric. "This was written the same night, but later. Hours later, I think." Rachel took the journal and continued reading. "We are trapped. The passages shift when we're not looking, rearranging themselves like a maze that doesn't want us to leave. Sister Isabel suggested we pray. And when we did, the walls began to hum with our voices. Sister Catherine collapsed. We carried her back to what we thought was the chapel chamber, but found ourselves in a different room entirely, one filled with bones far older than any buried in the monastery. Sister Ruth says she can hear them singing. The bones. I hear it too now. 4-part harmony, exactly like our Vespers. Sister Isabel thinks we released something when we opened that chamber, something that's been waiting. She's right. I can feel it in my bones, in my blood. It's aware of us. Maya had moved closer to read over Rachel's shoulder. This is impossible. People don't get trapped in catacombs that rearrange themselves. Keep reading, Vance said. The next entry was written in a shaking hand. Dawn should have come hours ago. We've been below for a full day and night by our count, but time feels broken here. Sister Catherine is dying. She whispers that she can see them. The ones who came before, the ones who built the deep chamber. She says they're not human. Not anymore. We made a su'a decision. Sister Ruth knows the old rites. The ones before Vatican II changed everything. If we can't escape, we can at least seal this place, prevent anyone else from making our mistake. We'll perform the rite, and then... The entry ended. The remaining pages were blank except for one final sentence on the last page, written in different ink. Forgive us, Father, for we knew what we did. Rachel closed the journal slowly, her hands trembling. They sealed themselves in, performed some kind of ritual to trap whatever they released. And died in the process, Jules added, his voice subdued. The camera was still recording, but he had lowered it slightly, as if the lens couldn't quite capture the horror of what they were learning. Vance nodded. The diocesan records show that a maintenance worker found the hidden entrance sealed from the inside 3 days after the nuns were reported missing. They assumed the sisters had suffered some kind of accident, but when they forced the door open, there was no sign of them, just empty catacombs in this chapel chamber. Then who brought their bodies to the burial niches? Rachel asked. Who laid them to rest? Vance's expression darkened. That's the part I can't explain. When I first explored down here 5 years ago, this chamber was exactly as the diocese had documented it. Empty, except for the journals and candles. The burial niches existed but were vacant. I came back 2 weeks later with a structural engineer, and the bodies were there. 4 of them, perfectly preserved, laid out as if they'd been there for decades. A sound echoed through the chamber, stone grinding against stone, deep and resonant. The candles in the wall sconces flickered despite no breeze, and Rachel felt the temperature drop another 10 degrees. We need to leave, Vance said urgently. Right now. That sound, it's the same sound I heard before I sealed the deeper passages. But when they turned toward the passage they'd entered through, Rachel felt her heart sink. The opening was gone, replaced by solid stone wall as if it had never existed. They were trapped, just like the nuns had been 37 years before. Maya played her flashlight across the wall where the passage had been, her breathing quick and shallow. This isn't possible. We just came through there. All of us saw it. Jules filmed the solid stone, his camera capturing the impossibility. There has to be an explanation. Hidden doors, movable walls. This monastery is full of them. Rachel forced herself to think logically, despite the rising panic. She examined the wall carefully, running her hands over the stone surface, searching for seams or triggers that might reveal a mechanism. The rock felt ancient and immovable beneath her fingers, worn smooth by centuries of moisture. The journals mentioned passages that shift, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Moving when you're not looking. It sounds insane, but we just watched it happen. Vance had retreated to the altar, his face pale in the combined glow of their lights. I told you not to come down here. I told you something was wrong." "Then help us figure it out," Rachel snapped. "You said you sealed the deeper passages. Where? Show us what you sealed off." For a moment, Vance seemed ready to refuse. Then his shoulders sagged in resignation. "This way. But I'm warning you. Approaching that chamber is dangerous. Just being near it affects your mind." He led them to the eastern wall of the chapel chamber, where another passage opened, this one descending at a steep angle. They followed him down, the air growing colder and damper with each step. Rachel noticed the walls here were different. The stone, darker, older, with those strange symbols Sister Isabel had mentioned carved in repeating patterns. The symbols hurt to look at. Rachel's eyes couldn't quite focus on them, and when she tried to trace their shapes, she felt a spike of pain behind her temples. Beside her, Maya had turned away, one hand pressed to her forehead. "Don't stare at them," Vance warned. "That's how it starts." The passage ended at a wall of modern brick, clearly added long after the original construction. The mortar was fresh enough to still show tool marks, and Vance's handiwork was evident in the careful professional placement of each brick. "This is it," he said. "Behind here is the chamber the nuns opened. I found it unsealed when I first explored 5 years ago. Went inside for maybe 30 seconds before I realized something was very wrong. Sealed it up that same week and haven't been back since." Rachel approached the brick wall, placing her palm against it. The surface was cold, far colder than the surrounding stone, and she could swear she felt vibration, like a heartbeat or distant machinery. "What did you see in there?" she asked. "In those 30 seconds?" Vance's jaw worked silently for a moment before he answered. "Bones. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, but arranged in patterns, deliberate configurations that formed, I don't know, shapes, sculptures, and in the center was something I couldn't identify, something organic but wrong, like it had been grown rather than built." Jules had been filming the brick wall, but now he lowered his camera. "You're describing some kind of ritual chamber, an ossuary." "I'm describing a nightmare," Vance corrected, "and the longer I stood there, the more I understood that whatever created that chamber wasn't human. Or it used to be human, but became something else through what? Centuries underground? Some kind of transformation?" Rachel's documentary instincts pushed past her fear. This was why she'd come, why she'd spent weeks researching the case. Not for the simple answer of 4 bodies in a catacomb, but for this, the impossible truth that defied explanation. "We need to see inside," she said. "Absolutely not," Vance replied immediately. "I sealed this for good reason. Whatever the nuns released, whatever they tried to trap with their ritual, it's contained as long as this wall stays intact." Maya had been examining the surrounding walls with her flashlight. "Rachel, look at this." She directed her beam to a section of carved symbols near the brick wall. Unlike the others, these glowed faintly with a sickly phosphorescence, pulsing in a slow, rhythmic pattern. "They weren't doing that before," Vance said, his voice rising with alarm. "The symbols were always dead, just carvings." As they watched, the glow intensified, spreading to adjacent symbols like a circuit coming to life. The vibration Rachel had felt in the brick wall grew stronger, and somewhere beyond it, they heard the sound of stone scraping against stone. "It's opening," Jules whispered. "The chamber is opening itself." A crack appeared in the brick wall, hairline thin but expanding. Mortar dust sifted down as the bricks began to shift, pushed outward by pressure from beyond. The singing returned, those 4 harmonious voices, but now they sounded triumphant rather than mournful. Rachel backed away from the wall, pulling Maya with her. "We need to find another way out. Now." They retreated up the passage, but when they reached the chapel chamber, they found it transformed. The space had doubled in size, new passages opening in walls that had been solid moments before. The candles in the sconces had lit themselves, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames. And standing around the altar were 4 figures in black habits, their faces obscured by shadow, their hands raised in prayer. As Rachel and the others stumbled to a halt, the figures turned in unison to face them. The faces beneath the habits were not dead, but they were not entirely alive either. Sister Catherine, Sister Ruth, Sister Margaret, and Sister Isabel gazed at them with eyes that held depths of suffering and knowledge no human should possess. When Sister Isabel spoke, her voice was a chorus, 4 voices speaking as one, layered over each other in impossible harmony. "You opened the way," they said, "just as we knew you would. 37 years we've waited. 37 years we've held the threshold. But now you've come, and our vigil can end." Sister Margaret stepped forward, her movements fluid but wrong, like a marionette on invisible strings. "We tried to seal it with our deaths. We tried to trap it with our souls. But we only delayed. The chamber wants to be opened. It calls to the living." "What is it?" Rachel heard herself ask. "What's in the deep chamber?" All 4 nuns smiled, and the expression was terrible to behold. "The reason the monastery was built here," Sister Ruth said, "the reason our order has maintained this vigil for 800 years, something older than Christianity, older than Rome, something that was here first and never truly left." The brick wall in the lower passage exploded outward with a sound like thunder, and a wave of cold air rushed through the catacombs, extinguishing every candle except the ones in the chapel. In that moment of darkness, Rachel heard something moving in the deep, something vast and patient, and finally, after centuries of waiting, free. The candles reignited all at once, their flames burning an unnatural blue-white that cast the chapel chamber in stark, shadowless light. Rachel's eyes adjusted to find the 4 nuns still standing around the altar, but they had changed. Their forms flickered like old film, alternating between the preserved corpses she'd seen in the niches and living women with desperate, haunted eyes. "Run," Sister Isabel said, her voice suddenly her own, young, terrified, fully human. "While we still have strength to hold it, run and seal the entrance behind you." The other nuns turned toward the passage where the brick wall had exploded, their bodies positioning themselves as a barrier between Rachel's group and whatever was emerging from the deep chamber. Rachel could see it now, a darkness that was more than absence of light, a writhing mass that seemed to exist in more dimensions than 3, reaching with appendages that defied description. "The northern passage," Sister Catherine gasped, pointing to an opening that had appeared in the wall behind them. "It leads to the original stairs. Go!" Vance didn't need to be told twice. He bolted toward the passage, and Jules followed, still clutching his camera. Maya grabbed Rachel's arm, pulling her toward escape, but Rachel resisted for one crucial moment. "What about you?" she called to the nuns. Sister Margaret's form solidified briefly, and Rachel saw tears on her cheeks. "We died here 37 years ago. What remains is just enough soul to finish what we started. Now go, or our sacrifice means nothing." The darkness surged forward, and the nuns began to sing. The same requiem mass Rachel had heard earlier, but now it carried power. The sound formed a barrier, pushing back against the entity, holding it at bay through force of faith and will. Rachel ran. The northern passage twisted upward in a steep spiral, the walls so narrow she had to turn sideways in places. Behind her, she could hear the singing growing fainter, and beneath it, a sound like grinding metal and screaming wind. Maya's breathing was harsh in her ears, and ahead, Jules's camera light bobbed and weaved as he climbed. They burst into a corridor Rachel recognized, the ground floor near the Mother Superior's office. Vance was already at the hidden panel, shoving it open, flooding the space with the orange light of late afternoon. The sight of the setting sun was so beautiful, it made Rachel's chest ache. All four of them tumbled through the opening and into the monastery's abandoned hallways. Vance immediately began searching for something to block the entrance, finally tipping a heavy filing cabinet across the opening. "That won't hold it," Jules said, his voice shaking. "It doesn't have to hold forever," Vance replied. "Just long enough for us to get out and bring the whole damn building down." They ran through the monastery, past the chapel where this nightmare had begun, through the entrance hall where dust motes still danced in the fading light. The main door stood open exactly as they'd left it, and beyond it, Rachel could see their vehicles in the parking area. As they burst outside into the cool mountain air, Rachel looked back at the monastery. For a moment, she could swear she saw 4 figures standing in the bell tower, nuns in black habits, watching their escape with expressions of profound relief. Then the bell began to ring, a deep, sonorous toll that echoed across the mountains. Once, twice, 3 times, and then silence. Inside the monastery, something groaned, the sound of stone settling, of structures failing. Rachel watched as cracks appeared in the bell tower's walls, spreading like lightning across the ancient granite. "Move!" Vance shouted, and they ran for the vehicles. They had just reached the tree line when the bell tower collapsed, pulling down the northern wing with it. The destruction cascaded through the building like a wave, each section falling into the one below, until Our Lady of Sorrows Monastery was nothing but a cloud of dust and rubble settling over broken stone. Rachel stood breathing hard, her camera crew beside her, watching the place where 4 nuns had kept vigil for 37 years, finally fall silent. In her pocket, her phone buzzed, signal restored now that they'd climbed high enough. A single text message from an unknown number. "Thank you. We can rest now." She looked at the screen, then at the ruins, understanding that some stories found their own endings, regardless of what the living might plan. "Did you get any of that on camera?" she asked Jules quietly. He nodded, his face pale but determined. "Every second. But Rachel, no one's going to believe it." "I know," she replied, "but we'll tell it anyway." The documentary, The Vanishing Sisters, Our Lady of Sorrows, premiered 6 months later to immediate controversy. Rachel had edited the footage carefully, presenting the facts: 4 missing nuns, their bodies discovered in a sealed catacomb, evidence of a ritual chamber beneath the monastery, while leaving the more inexplicable elements to speak for themselves. The footage from inside the catacombs was damning. The journals, the symbols, the brick wall exploding outward, and most disturbing of all, the final sequence showing 4 translucent figures in the chapel chamber before the monastery's collapse. Skeptics called it elaborate CGI. Believers called it proof of the supernatural. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in the uncertain space between. The investigation that followed unearthed uncomfortable facts. Thomas Vance admitted to discovering the bodies 5 years earlier and failing to report them, though he maintained he'd been protecting the public from something dangerous. He faced charges of failing to report a death and obstruction of justice, receiving a suspended sentence in exchange for his cooperation. The remains of Sister Catherine Brennan, Sister Ruth Alvarez, Sister Margaret Chen, and Sister Isabel Morrison were positively identified through dental records and DNA comparison with living relatives. The coroner's report listed cause of death as undetermined, but noted evidence of starvation and dehydration consistent with being trapped underground. What the report didn't mention, what couldn't be explained through medical science, was that all 4 women's bodies showed signs of having died decades earlier. yet their internal organs remained partially preserved in a way that defied natural decomposition. The pathologist who performed the autopsies requested to remain anonymous and refused interviews. The Catholic diocese issued a statement acknowledging the tragic deaths and commending the sisters' dedication to their faith. They did not address the journal's content or the nature of the deep chamber, and when Rachel requested access to the monastery's historical records, she found that the entire archive from 1100 to 1920 had been mysteriously damaged in a water leak. Convenient timing that she noted but couldn't prove was deliberate. Rachel sat in her editing studio 3 months after the documentary's release, reviewing footage she hadn't included in the final cut. The scene showed Sister Isabel's final words before they fled. "We died here 37 years ago. What remains is just enough soul to finish what we started." Her phone rang, a Los Angeles area code she didn't recognize. "Rachel Moreno," she answered. "Ms. Moreno, my name is Father Antonio Delgado. I'm with the Vatican's Archives and Library. I watched your documentary with great interest." Rachel sat up straighter. "I'm listening." "The monastery you investigated has a history that predates its Christian use by centuries. What you found, the deep chamber, the symbols, the entity, this was not the first time the Church has encountered such things, nor will it be the last. Are you saying the Vatican knows about these places? These entities?" A long pause. "I'm saying that there are some things in this world that existed before human faith gave them names. The Church has spent 2,000 years learning how to recognize them, contain them, and when necessary, seal them away. Those 4 nuns were trained in methods most clergy never learn. They understood the risks." "Then why build a monastery there at all?" Rachel demanded. "Why not just leave it alone?" "Because leaving it alone doesn't work," Father Delgado replied quietly. "These places, these things, they call to people. They draw the curious, the ambitious, those seeking power or knowledge. The monastery served as both prison and guardian. The sisters who volunteered for that duty knew they might be called upon to make the ultimate sacrifice." Rachel felt a chill. "How many other places like this exist?" "That information is classified, but Ms. Moreno, your documentary has attracted attention from people who would seek out such sites. I'm calling to warn you. There will be requests for you to investigate similar mysteries. I strongly advise you to decline. And if I don't, then may God have mercy on your soul, and may you be as brave as Sister Catherine, Sister Ruth, Sister Margaret, and Sister Isabel when the time comes." The line went dead. Rachel sat in silence for a long moment, then opened her laptop and checked her email. 17 new messages in the folder she'd created titled Investigation Requests. She scanned the subject lines: Sealed Convent in Bavaria, Missing Monks of Mount Athos, The Silent Sisters of Quebec. Each one promised a mystery. Each one whispered of the inexplicable. She thought about the 4 nuns standing in the bell tower, watching as she escaped. She thought about their choice to stay, to hold the line between the world of light and the darkness that existed in the deep places of the earth. Rachel Moreno closed the email folder without opening a single message. Some stories, she had learned, were never meant to be told. But 3 weeks later, she boarded a plane to Bavaria,